of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, as well as being my favorite Call of Duty game. And this should come as no surprise, of course, since Simon Ghost Riley is the avatar of my channel. I also haven't been hyped for a COD game since Black Ops 2, but now, with the upcoming release of Modern Warfare 2019, I'm beginning to feel the same kind of excitement that I used to feel when I was a naive 15-year-old cursing out strangers on multiplayer matches. And not without good reason. From what I've seen in both interviews and gameplay, this is shaping up to be a proper return to form for the franchise. In fact, it's one statement given by an excited fan that made me cautiously optimistic about this game. Modern Warfare 2019 makes Modern Warfare 2's No Russian look like a Pixar film. Now, the reason I say cautiously optimistic is because, on the one hand, I am very glad to hear that a COD campaign will not be holding back and that it will regain a lot of the grit that made their classic campaigns feel both engaging and visceral. On the other hand, I fear that the writers of this new campaign might not understand what it was that made a mission like No Russian so impactful. Controversial, yes, but undeniably impactful. At the same time, I've also seen people stigmatize the mission and claim it to be nothing more than violence for the sake of violence. A mission that does nothing but shock the audience for the sake of gathering media attention. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we'll be exploring today. So let's dive right in and find out what makes No Russian important. Right off the bat, we can start by looking at the story structure of the campaign, and immediately I can say without a bit of hesitation that No Russian is pivotal to the plot of Modern Warfare 2. And I don't think I'm being condescending when I say that this is not an opinion, it's a fact. You see, when writing stories, there's a model known as the 3-act structure, which summarizes the 3 sections that all stories have: first, second, and third act, also known as the beginning, middle, and end. And would you look at that? Of course, there are a myriad of different forms of story structures, but it's clear which one Modern Warfare 2 adheres to. In these 3 acts, there are subsections that detail the purposes of each act. The first act is all about setting up the world, as well as some of the key players in the story, and the inciting incident for the conflict. Then you have the second act, which is the midpoint, where the action rises and our protagonist tries to find a way to resolve the conflict. And finally, the third act is the climax and the resolution of everything that had been set up before. It's in the first act where we find the importance of No Russian, for you see, No Russian is the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the hook of the story. It's the thing that gets the ball rolling. In The Last of Us, it's the moment Joel agrees to smuggle Ellie. In Resident Evil 2, it's Leon arriving in Raccoon City during a zombie outbreak. Without the inciting incident, there's no reason for our protagonists to embark on their journey, and thus, there is no story. While Makarov had been somewhat established before this mission, it's not until No Russian that Jon Soap McTavish and his team, aka our protagonists, set their sights on actually finding and stopping Makarov. So without No Russian, there is no story. Of course, for some, this isn't good enough. Some might ask, well, why not have someone like General Shepard brief you and then say, go stop Makarov? Well, to this I say, show, don't tell. This is a rule of storytelling, typically associated with visual mediums such as film and television, which states that the best way to convey certain things is through action and not dialogue. If someone is sad, don't have them say, I'm sad, show them bawling their eyes out. If someone has anger issues, don't have them say, I'm angry, show them overreacting with anger. This allows the audience to believe in the world and believe in the characters and what they are going through. Makarov is meant to be a bastard, a cold-hearted killer with no redeemable qualities, and he's also supposed to be a major threat. In order for us to understand what is at stake, we need to see Makarov commit atrocities. In short, if we don't see No Russian, then the player doesn't feel the weight of what is taking place, thus making Makarov just an obstacle at best, and not a full-fledged antagonist that needs to be stopped. Compare this to one of the prologue missions in the original Modern Warfare, the Coup. Through the eyes of President Al-Fulani, we see the terror in the streets as dozens of people are either running away from al-Assad's men or being put up against a wall and shot. This sequence sets up al-Assad as a threat that needs to be stopped, as well as setting up characters that will be important later, like Imran Zakhaev, who becomes the main antagonist of that game. Of course, a cutscene isn't enough in the medium of video games, so I found a similar rule that works better for this medium. Play, don't just show. Similar to Show Don't Tell, this is meant as a reminder of how to enhance the narrative of a video game. And I feel the best games are the ones that make use of this rule. For example, in The Last of Us, a lot of important plot points are showcased in cutscenes, that is true, but a lot of major character interactions are experienced solely through the gameplay. If you only look at the cutscenes, you'd never know of Ellie's propensity for telling jokes to lighten the mood, or Ellie giving Joel back the picture of his daughter, or Henry forbidding his brother to pick up a toy. There are a myriad of different interactions and character moments that can only be experienced through playing the game. Without experiencing the terror of Makarov head-on, you may be able to convey the threat, but you fail to take advantage of the medium you're telling the story in. It's kind of like the issue that I have with walking simulators like Dear Esther. Easy target, I know. Where the story is merely told to you, and you don't really partake in it. You just walk around while listening to a story that would have been better suited for a book or a visual novel. In short, not only do we need to see No Russian, but with it being a video game, we also need to experience it.
This is a message. The Americans thought he could deceive us. When they find our body, all of Russia will cry for war.
Still, there are some articles like this one in Vice.com that claim that No Russian should not exist, and also offers an alternate structure for the mission. Modern Warfare 2 has stealth mechanics. Like the original game's All Gillied Up mission, there are several levels wherein you must sneak around guards, and, conveniently, the section directly preceding No Russian, called Cliffhanger, provides one such occasion. Having just taught players precisely how stealth systems work and feel, Modern Warfare 2, once No Russian begins, is at an ideal place to use those systems to explore something narrative and affecting. More importantly, if you were to play as one of Makarov's victims rather than his accomplice, Modern Warfare 2's sympathies would lie with the right people. To have to cautiously pick around the environment, avoiding the attention of the terrorists, would have been a riveting experience. Now at first, this sounds like a reasonable compromise. And indeed, this is a phenomenal idea. However, this writer fails to see the big picture. The reason why No Russian plays out the way it does. But before we continue, we must first get something out of the way. A lot of stories we see and read about tend to be based around some form of conflict, and conflict typically leads to violence. Whether it's stories of secret agents trying to save the world, teenagers being chased by homicidal maniacs, or even a skinny Michael Cera fighting for the love of a woman, violence is the most concrete, physical embodiment of conflict, which is why many stories feature it, even if it is for a brief moment. Art is meant to be an imitation, a representation of the human condition, and with that, I'm of the camp that believes that there is no limit to what art can show. Art can be beautiful, but it can also be repulsive. Of course, regardless of my stance, I do understand that there is a need to ask why. Why is this so violent? And what is it that this story is trying to say with the violence on display? So, what is the pathos behind the violence of No Russian? And why is it necessary to show it from the perspective of undercover agent Joseph Allen? The answer is consequentialism. Consequentialism is a philosophical idea which states that only the ultimate outcome of an action determines whether that action is right or wrong. And in layman's terms, it's the belief that the ends justify the means. Consequentialism is an idea that has been present since mankind could think and theorize, and it's still a debate that we ourselves face in everyday life. For example, justifying cheating on a test for the sake of passing. In story form, this idea is naturally taken to its biggest extremes. Stories like the entirety of Death Note, the ending of Watchmen, and even as recent as Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. All of these stories and these characters come together and ask the same question. Do the ends justify the means? And Modern Warfare 2 is no exception. Before the mission begins, you're given a quick brief by General Shepard, and one of the last things he says to Joseph Allen is,
"You don't want to know what it's cost already to put you next to him. It will cost you a piece of yourself. It will cost nothing compared to everything you'll save."
So already, the idea of consequentialism is established early on through General Shepard, and it doesn't stop there. You'll later see Soap and Ghost about to torture a man for information about Makarov, and in a later mission, Captain Price ignores his orders and hijacks a submarine. He then launches a missile and detonates it in the atmosphere to create an EMP effect that neutralizes the Russians' equipment during their invasion of America. He also incidentally destroys the International Space Station, but Price didn't know it was there at the time, and he likely didn't expect that Call of Duty physics would fuck it up.
Not scientifically possible!
And of course, let's not forget this classic monologue.
This is for the record. History is written by the victor. History is filled with liars. If he lives and we die, his truth becomes written and ours is lost. Shepard will be a hero, because all you need to change the world is one good lie and a river of blood. He's about to complete the greatest trick a liar ever played on history. His truth will be the truth, but only if he lives and we die.
The funny thing is that the phrase, "history is written by the victor," is actually first spoken by General Shepard. And pay close attention to how the context changes the morality of the phrase.
Sure, it matters who's got the biggest stick, but it matters a hell of a lot more who's swinging it. This is a time for heroes, a time for legends. History is written by the victors. Let's get to work.
General Shepard uses it as a way to validate himself and the actions his men take, while Captain Price uses it as a way to condemn his actions and the amount of innocent lives that they caused. And naturally, that's the difference between our heroes and our villains. While Soap and Price will gladly commit war crimes if it means stopping terrorists, sacrificing innocent people, or even allowing innocents to die for the purposes of their mission, that is where they draw the line. Okay, that's nice and all. But what does consequentialism have to do with this mission, you might be asking? Well, one of No Russian's criticisms is that if Joseph Allen was an undercover agent sent to stop Makarov, why would he allow the massacre to take place, and why doesn't he stop him beforehand? The answer is both simple and horrifying. Because he had explicit orders not to stop Makarov. Think of the gameplay. While the game never rewards you for anything you do, it does punish you for one thing: attempting to kill Makarov and his men. Now, I understand I might be reaching by using this as evidence. After all, the game developers likely didn't intend this to allude to anything greater within the narrative. However, that is the issue with art. Once it's completed and observed, its interpretation no longer belongs to the author alone. It belongs to anyone who observes this piece of art. So whether the devs intended this to imply Allen's real orders or not, it's still there regardless for everyone to see. Now this does beg the question, why would General Shepard want Makarov to spark World War III? Well, let's hear what he has to say.
5 years ago, I lost 30,000 men in the blink of an eye. And the world just fucking watched. Tomorrow, there will be no shortage of volunteers, no shortage of patriots. I know you understand.
General Shepard's overall plan is never made explicitly clear, which is kinda refreshing as it makes his character feel more real and less like a cackling supervillain. Still, from what I've been able to deduce, his motivation and his goal can be summarized in one phrase. Civis pacem parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. This phrase is meant as an affirmation that the best way to maintain peace in your nation is to be armed to the teeth, ready to defend it. Shepard's goal is, effectively, to start World War III and lead the United States to victory, in order to both cripple Russia, which has now been overrun by ultranationalists in the Modern Warfare universe, and turn the United States into the world's greatest military superpower, and thus ensuring that no one will dare fuck with them the way Zakhaev did 5 years ago. This is why Shepard betrays you at the end of Loose Ends, and this is why Joseph Allen is not allowed to kill Makarov beforehand. Likely, his plan was to have Allen as an undercover agent ready to either take out or capture Makarov when the time came. Regardless, Shepard would be the one to take the credit for the operation, thus winning the war and cementing himself as a hero. However, Allen is killed, and Shepard is forced to rely on Soap McTavish and his team to find him. This is the big picture. This is why the mission needs to play out the way it does. First, because the game uses the same visual at the end of No Russian in the ending of Loose Ends to create a sort of visual rhyme of sorts that helps emphasize that Shepard has now replaced Makarov as the antagonist. But most importantly, without it, the themes of consequentialism and the subsequent feeling of emptiness at the end of the mission would have been lost. I don't know about you guys, but when No Russian was over, I felt an emptiness in my stomach. I had just sat through some of the most horrid shit I had ever experienced in a video game up until that point. And it was all for nothing. My character, Joseph Allen, was dead. I allowed this act of terrorism to take place, thinking that there was some reason, some greater goal. But if there was, it doesn't matter now. It's somewhat similar to the feeling I get whenever I see the ending of Seven or the ending of the 2008 horror film Eden Lake, which, if you've seen either one of those movies, you know just how devastating those endings are. However, No Russian is a completely different experience because I was on the other side. I was the bad guy. I was the monster. And whether I took part in it or not, it doesn't matter because I could have stopped it and I didn't. Because as Joseph Allen, I was ordered not to. I was told this would cost nothing compared to everything we would save. But if the ends justify the means, what happens if those ends are never achieved? That is the question that No Russian asks through the experience that only a video game can provide. While I acknowledge the playing as a victim would have been fascinating, in the grand scheme, it doesn't really amount to much beyond trying to evoke a sense of terror. The mission would have been cool, but it wouldn't have been as relevant. It would have likely been tense, but it wouldn't have conveyed the same mixed feelings you normally get playing the mission. And it certainly wouldn't tie into the game's stories and its themes the way that No Russian does now. And in the end, for better or for worse, this series has always been about soldiers told from the perspective of soldiers. Yes, it's highly stylized and it has a lot of popcorn action sequences, but its focus has always been on the soldiers who go above and beyond the call of duty. I understand that the Modern Warfare series is flawed in terms of writing, and I know that Modern Warfare 2 isn't the best campaign in the series. Personally, Black Ops still holds that title. But just because it's not the best doesn't mean it isn't good, and just because it's flawed doesn't mean the series is not worth analyzing. While the story itself isn't the most interesting in the series, its storytelling is second to none. And so, whenever I think of how gameplay can drastically improve a story, I think of Modern Warfare 2. And that is what I hope Modern Warfare 2019 brings to the table. Because contrary to what politicians and journalists think of these games and us gamers, I don't just care about violence, and I don't just want to see shocking imagery. I want to have an experience. I want to feel excitement, fear, tension, dread, and any other emotion that I can think of. I want something to stick with me for years to come. Because that is what art is all about. And at one point in time, that is what Call of Duty was all about.